Welcome back to the channel, ladies and gentlemen. Happy New Year. Blessings to you and your family, and I hope this is your best year yet. Today, I have for you everything you need to know regarding Game Week 20. We'll be looking at it in a slightly different fashion. The sections will be less intertwined with others because we'll be specifically looking at the forwards, then the midfielders, then the Rodgers suspension and the implications of that on your teams from more of a practical standpoint, and then the defenders. If you do enjoy the video, make sure to drop a like on it. Similarly, if you have been enjoying the content on the channel recently, if you are a new viewer and you'd like to cash in on some of the luck that many of the people in the comment section have had, multiple top 1Ks, then do consider pressing that subscribe button as we approach 6,000 subscribers. As can be seen by the graphic on screen, this is being recorded before the conclusion of the Brentford versus Arsenal game. So any insights from that match, I will not be able to provide within this video. Now, without anything else needing to be said, let's hop into it. We shall start up top and work our way backwards, starting with Mateta Cunha and just forward replacements in general. I do not think Cunha is a must sell. I know he's already loitering around 500,000 transfers out for this game week. And I know the general perspective is that he's a hard sell. I'd say he's more of a soft to medium sell. I think the fixtures after the one he's suspended for, which is Nottingham Forest, really aren't that bad from an attacking standpoint for him specifically. Newcastle away, well, okay, fine. Newcastle records a 12-pointer against Manchester United, but he was quite lucky to keep the clean sheet considering some of the chances Man United have had. And I wouldn't say, even though they've boasted a very good defensive record as of late, even though I've been waxing lyrical about them and they certainly have improved, I would not say this is a defense which is anywhere close to the standard of Arsenal's or even Liverpool's, especially when Konate is there, whereby it's a guaranteed clean sheet or Cunha's ceiling is even limited. I would not say that's the case. So I think Newcastle away is not bad, and Chelsea away is definitely a better fixture than that, I would say, at the moment, given the way with the defending, just given our general form. So for me, I would say this is a soft to medium sell. Of course, you're losing out on the fixture this week. Of course, Newcastle away and Chelsea away aren't the best fixtures, hence why I say one counter argument to the soft to medium sell into turning it a hard sell would be the opportunity cost, whereby other players have significantly better fixtures. And secondly, if you have the Rodgers suspension, which we're going to touch on later, now you have two players out, right? So it almost means you have to make the move because you don't want to play with one player less, or you don't want to play 4-4-2, especially if you have another player, let's say, suspended or injured during like the next 3-4 days. That will also impact the health of your team quite significantly when you're running thin anyway. So, like I said, I think it's perspective dependent. I do not think, however, it's the hardest of sells in every single case. And as you'll see through the section, I'm not particularly bullish on a lot of forward assets. I think that's the general case for most people. It's why Wood is so popular at the moment, as opposed to maybe a more exciting option considering his next two fixtures, albeit he's been absolutely brilliant, and we will touch on him and give him the compliments he deserves. But as you can see, just from the general category, and even in the midfielders as well, there's not these standout options which everyone's rushing to buy. Otherwise, there'd generally just be a lot more hype within the community about certain assets. Now, let's move on to Nicholas Jackson, who is loitering around 250,000 transfers out so far and is a very popular sell at the moment. However, my view is somewhat different and has even shifted more so than when I was recording transfer plans. In transfer plans, I expressed how I did not think this was maybe even a sell, and now I'm pretty sure in most cases I wouldn't sell him. Why? Well, firstly, just like I've said before, I do not think there is a standout replacement. So having that transfer stored there allows you to at least go into a different route down the line when a potential standout option presents themselves, right? So at least you're opening yourself up to that upside. Let's say you go Jackson to Wood, and we will touch on Wood later. You're almost locking yourself in there. And like I said, he's a very good asset in his own right, but maybe someone comes along with a bit more upside, albeit after the Liverpool game. There's a decent amount of upside associated with Chris Wood, I would say. Looking at Jackson in isolation, I think the expected minutes will be good, right? He was benched against Southampton, then it was 4 starts, and then it was a benching away at Ipswich. But Nkunku's been so poor every single time he's come on, or at least hasn't hit the level that you would have liked. I don't think he can continuously eat into Jackson's minutes, especially now that he's had the start. He can't really complain, right? At least before he could be like, okay, let me show you what I can do from the off. Now that he's had the opportunity in one of the better fixtures of the season and not really produced, I think it's harder for him to justify these even 70-minute subs. I think it's more so going to be around 80, if at all, now, right? So I'm happy with the expected minutes. The fixture one's actually quite good. We'll touch on Palace a little bit later. I don't think it's the worst fixture in the world at the moment for an attacking asset. I don't think it's great. I just think it's somewhere in the middle, but it's not as bad maybe as it's being perceived in some cases. And then after that, Bournemouth at home, Wolves at home. That's pretty decent for him. He can definitely return there. Even from a stylistic standpoint, Bournemouth at home is a very good fixture for him. Wolves is okay. It depends how they approach the game. But it'll still be one of the better fixtures, I guess you could say, even with their upturn in form and how they're performing under the new manager. And then prioritization, which we've spoken about before, and efficiencies of transfers. With double game week 24 looming, and it really isn't that far away. We're already at 20. Before you know it, we'll be at 24. Just give it about a month's time. You'll also want to be making transfers before that to prepare for it in some cases, if not continuously rolling. So Liverpool assets, maybe even Everton assets, taking money out of your squad for the assistant manager chip, if you're planning to play that instead of the triple captain. And who knows, maybe later down the line, right, maybe 1 week before, it actually appears that Salah's had this huge drop-off in form and the assistant manager chip is now optimal. So you'll be needing transfers to take it out. So I think where you can save at the moment and where there's not huge upside associated to other options, and I'll go through the other options available, and I will pretty much say unanimously, maybe apart from Wood and Mateta to an extent, but that's more so from next week, there's not. I think saving that transfer makes a lot of sense. Now, one thing I have spoken about with Nicholas Jackson, and it's really my issue with him at the moment, is the body language, the confidence, and I feel like last season we saw that when he's not firing, right, one thing that's closely associated to it is his body language. You take someone like Cole Palmer, I think he largely maintains a similar level of confidence throughout pretty much all games, regardless of form. I know he hasn't had a huge downswing, but even recently, when Chelsea haven't been playing well, I expect him to come into the Palace game really, really feeling good. Whereas with Jackson, I think he's slightly more volatile in that sense. So he just needs one. And if he can get one and get that confidence back and Chelsea can get a win, then I can see with the fixture run that lasts for quite a while as well. I spoke about this maybe a few weeks ago. You could genuinely keep him until 34 based on the fixtures. Then all of a sudden he becomes a much better asset. So I say just give him a little bit more time, especially when there's no standout option, and then, or at least an option that's particularly exciting with a huge amount of upside associated in the short term, and then we can reassess. Now, let's move on to Chris Wood. And I am in no way trying to suggest that this is a bad buy. I just simply am challenging whether it's an optimal buy. He has undoubtedly been one of the best forwards in the game, and you could very safely argue he has been the best forward in the game when you consider the points he's got relative to the price he started at and still is now, right? There are so many good things going for him. The fixtures are interesting because I don't think Wolves away, Liverpool at home is particularly great. It's not the end of the world by any stretch, but I don't think it's particularly great. But after that, the four after that, I think are pretty decent. Then you've got Forest's form, and you've got his form as well. You've got his price, so he acts as a very good facilitator for the rest of your squad, especially if you're looking to go maybe early, I guess, on Trent and Van Dijk in preparation for the double game week and having them there as a set and forget. Man United don't look like they're going to pose too much attacking threat at Anfield, so maybe he facilitates that in a double move. And, like I said, his own individual prospects, right? And that's all great. And Wolves away, Liverpool at home is mainly where my issue lies. I just think that there's not enough upside associated with those two fixtures, or they're not that brilliant as a set compared to someone like Nicholas Jackson, who's largely going to be the route here, right? Which is why I keep touching on this. Obviously, if you want to go Cunha to Wood for whatever reason, that's in pretty much all cases going to be justifiable. But specifically for Jackson to Wood, I think it makes it a little bit more difficult to justify given the quality of those two fixtures, where Jackson has a good run until 34. So maybe just let it play out over the next 2 weeks and see what happens. Bournemouth at home next week is undoubtedly better than Liverpool at home when at the same time, because that's when Chris Wood will have it. So that's my perspective on it. Just over the next 2 weeks, I don't think it's really worth making this move because I think having the transfer down the line will hold you in better stead and essentially will be worth it. But like I said, it's still a good transfer and he's in top form, Forrester in really good form, and so on and so on. So I can't say it's a bad buy. I'm just not sure if it's an optimal buy simply because of the usage of the transfer. By Cody Gakpo, well, he's been someone who's been performing on the pitch for a while now and at a very, very, very good standard. My issue with him is when you look at the forwards, right, we've got Isak, who's pretty much a lock. Personally, when we go on to discussing optimal structures here, you have João Pedro. And then if we're going to have one more, Jackson, Wood, Mateta, who we come on to, maybe a Watkins punt, Cunha, if you're going to keep him just for his one game suspension, they all have much better expected minutes than him. Maybe Gakpo gets a benching here and there, but even if not, I don't think he'll see too many 90s. And I think his expected minutes will loiter at a lower level than all of them. So are you prepared to accept that when all of these other options exist? And I don't think you need to accept that. And I don't think he's providing you with enough upside whereby you are going to accept that. So for me personally, I don't think it's worth it. Albeit, if you can time the expected minutes in a wonderful rotation, and you can build one with him and maybe Rodgers and João Pedro, and you're bullish enough on João Pedro and Rodgers to start a few more games in your side than most squad structures would have, then yeah, okay, makes sense. But still, for me, I think with the expected minutes, I would steer away. Even though he's got a double coming up, even though he's playing really well, and even though he looks very, very sharp, and Liverpool look very sharp as well. Given Alexander Isak's effective ownership has loitered around 75% to 80% for the last few weeks now, there will be some of you who do not own him. And I think that he's not going to stop, and you should bring him in. One thing that's definitely present within the community, I've been guilty of in the past, and I think pretty much everyone who's played any sort of game similar to FPL has been guilty of in the past, is committing gambler's fallacy. And for those of you who don't know what that is, imagine I have a coin and I flip it 100 times and it's heads 100 times in a row. Your justification for going tails, if you were to select the next time, will be that, oh, it can't be heads again. When in reality, it's just a 50-50 flip, and there's no reason why it can't be heads again just because it's been heads 100 times in a row. The past is completely irrelevant in this case. This is slightly different, right? Because the pass is not so relevant here. We need to take form into account, but largely the same principle applies. There's no real indication that Alexander Isak is going to stop. As expressed, the fixtures are good until 24. And honestly, I think even past that, we could hold him past that, not just because of his form, but more so how I interpret those fixtures now as well. I know he's getting really expensive, but he probably only get more expensive as more and more people buy him, and that EO climbs up to 90%. And with the fixture in mind as well, such a good stylistic fit for him. One where there should be a lot of goals. One where Spurs have, well, they're in a really tough spot at the moment and they've got a lot of injuries. I would be looking at buying him as a priority transfer. Right now, every side is going to be different. And in some cases, fading him and accepting the risk of not having him is going to be optimal for your squad. And that's completely fair. But in the spots where it's close or in the spots where it can be done, I would do it. Moving on to another forward I like. And you know what? He might actually be my favorite replacement for Jackson if you were to go there, simply due to the longevity associated with him through the fixtures and the fact that I think he's on the verge of coming good, and that is Jean-Philippe Mateta. I say that I'm confident in him, not super confident. I say confident, not super confident, because he's been close many times to getting that haul, to getting that goal, to having a consistent run, but he's just missing out on it slightly, even a few like half chances against Southampton or a couple balls that were just centimeters away from falling to him. And I think with the fixture run being so good for such a long period of time, with Palace improving, with them looking sharper, he's going to come good. And he's at a fairly decent price point, pretty much the same price as Cunha now. And if you are to sell someone like Nicholas Jackson, who is very popular, to sell someone like Matthias Cunha, who has combined, what, 750,000 transfers out, I think this is a decent route if you don't want to go Chris Wood. Or maybe you want to have Mateta, Wood, and Isak, right? Slightly different squad structure to, let's say, Isak, Jackson, and João Pedro, but a similar price. So yeah, I like Mateta quite a bit. And then, is Ollie Watkins worth the upside? I was pretty clear in my perspective that I think this was a 2-week punt. And I don't think there's enough upside associated when everything's taken into context for you to make this a 1-week punt. Yeah, sure, I like the Leicester fixture a lot for him. He should get 90 minutes. He's on penalties. He scored both of them that he's got this season. And in general, he's a top player, right? And this is a good fixture for him. But considering the funds that would be tied up there, considering you can't use them anywhere else, considering that this would block Liverpool defence in some capacity, or at least block the assistant manager chip down the line, or block an upgrade elsewhere, considering that after this, it's Everton away, Arsenal away, which isn't the best, and other strikers will have better fixtures with more upside associated to it, and you'll have to transfer him out, and you'll probably have to transfer him in now because you don't have him and you're not going to sell. Is this the most efficient usage of transfers when everything taken into context? Okay, fine. He might outscore pretty much every forward this week, but will it be worth it in the long run? I personally don't think so. I think you'd also have to have a lot of conviction in those cheaper assets, and quite a few of them. You'll need to field some of them, especially with Rodgers' injury, to facilitate him in the squad. So for me, personally, I don't think it's worth it. Obviously, you don't sell. I don't think it's like 100-0, whereby it's absolutely in no situation can you justify this move. Of course, in some situations, everyone will be in different situations. You can, but in most, I really wouldn't be going here. Now we move on to the midfielders. And similar to the forward category, there is no real standout option because none of them, I would say, has huge upside associated to them in the short term. Otherwise, pretty much everyone would be going there. And similarly, a lot of them have flaws with their flaws. However, if I were to nominate a valedictorian for the class, it would be Anthony Gordon. Why? Well, there are a few reasons. One, as we've expressed many a time on this channel, you can pretty much hold Newcastle assets all the way up till 23, 24, and probably now beyond that, given how my interpretation of the fixtures that they have has slightly shifted and their continuous upturn in form. That's one thing. The second thing is the left-hand side dynamics. And there's a lot of layers to this because, for example, what Hall does helps Joelinton, which helps Gordon. But similarly, what Joelinton does helps Hall, which helps Gordon as well, and so on and so on, right? But just to touch on it a little, the overlaps that Hall provides, the underlaps, the fact that he's so good technically, the fact that he can facilitate those small space combinations, the fact that Joelinton is such a brilliant athlete, so he can almost protect against transitions and allow Newcastle to sustain themselves a little bit higher so that Gordon doesn't have to do quite as much work off the ball, or at least it's not as important because you have Joelinton covering in some capacity, right? And that is just the tip of the iceberg, right? There's so much more to it. And that helps a lot because then Gordon can almost be slightly more relentless in his pursuit of output, of helping Newcastle score goals. I would like to see a little bit more of last year's Anthony Gordon, where there's a little bit more responsibility on him to get things done in terms of output. I think now it's slightly diversified across Murphy, Gordon, Isak, Bruno Guimaraes, and Joelinton. And that's a compliment to the rest of the team. But for FPL specifically, I would like Gordon to take the reins just a little bit more. And who knows, maybe he gets one goal and gets the mood a little bit more and a little bit more dramatic. So we shall see. Albeit to me, he seems like a real team player. So I wouldn't be surprised to see if he's still in a role which is slightly more supportive, as everyone is, probably aside from Alexander Isak. Then moving on to the fixtures. In the short term, Spurs away, that's a good fixture from a stylistic standpoint. Wolves at home, not so much. Bournemouth at home is open to interpretation. Can be and couldn't be. But at least they're both at home. And we've shown, or he's shown, how good he is at home, right? So there are a lot of good things going for him. And I would say the only real negatives are, one, maybe he tails us slightly with the fixtures not being as stylistically suitable for him in the medium term. And secondly, he's probably not hitting the ceiling, albeit it has a good floor. He's not hitting the ceiling that you would like just because of the spread of output at Newcastle. However, that could change, and he's got goals in his locker. For example, the one he scored against Aston Villa, and that helps. That type of goal requires a lot of quality, and he's got that. So he can get us returns in similar ways to maybe Cunha, of course, from pretty much no XG at all. So yeah, for me, the valedictorian of this class. Then moving on to Eze and Sarr, my view hasn't shifted so much. Maybe a little more appreciation for Eze. Maybe that's because of the goal, but I'll explain why the goal got me thinking in a slightly different way. I realized that Eze still has this X factor about him, and some of the fundamentals he has that Sarr does not, and that helps him, right? However, with Sarr's positioning, he really should have scored, I think, his chance against Southampton. You saw the XGI being above 1, which is so high, especially not to get a return. You consider the fact that he's cheaper, his minutes have been good, he's not really struggling with any injuries this season either, and just general positioning as well. So with all that in mind, I still prefer Sarr. However, now I have slightly more appreciation for Eze, purely due to the X factor that he holds. And when he does return, he's very likely to get bonus and some of the fundamentals he holds, which Sarr does not. Moving on to the second and last slide of the midfielders. Of course, there is no mention of Jared Bowen in this section, but considering the value he holds in your team and considering that he has sustained a fracture, I believe, to the foot, it's probably wise to take him out, especially with the options on display. Now, Brian Mbeumo is interesting because you look at Southampton away, you think good. And it is good. It's probably not it's not even close to as good as it was when they came to the GTEC and Brentford, I think, won 3-1 and Mbeumo hauled with the brace. But it's still good, simply because they've tightened up and they're a better side, than, at least defensively, than they were under Russell Martin, in my opinion. However, after that, at least on the FDR to the naked eye, it looks pretty ugly. City at home, Liverpool at home, Palace away, Spurs at home. But in reality, with how susceptible City have been to those transitions, with the firepower that Brentford hold, with how many goals they scored at the GTEC, I don't think City at home is really that bad at all. Like, Leicester gave them a lot of problems. And like I mentioned on X, it was probably my luckiest clean sheet of the season. There's no reason why, 1, Brentford can't score, 2, Mbeumo can't return, and 3, Mbeumo can't haul. Okay, so that's that. Then you also take into account that Liverpool, without Gomez and Konate, aren't going to be as strong from a defensive standpoint. And again, it's at the GTEC, and there's no reason why Mbeumo can't return from there. Palace away is like in the middle. It's just very much a middling fixture at the moment. But again, he's Brian Mbeumo. Think about all his routes to points, the fundamentals he holds, the quality of player, and then Spurs at home. Again, a lovely. I think that's one of the best fixtures you could have at the moment from an attacking standpoint. And they're all at home. That's the thing. All these three big, quote unquote, big sides are at home, and Brentford have put pretty much everyone to the sword at home, and at the bare minimum scored goals, unless you're Nottingham Forest and on a title charge, of course. So I really like it, and he's up there. I think him and Gordon are up there. I've even considered the move this week before the West Ham game to go Foden to Mbeumo, and I'll have that for you in my team selection when I've actually thought about it more myself, mainly because if Foden plays like right wing again, output's reduced, Southampton away will be a better fixture, and honestly, I really fancy Mbeumo for the run afterwards. So yeah. And then the other thing I just wanted to mention on this slightly more expensive midfield section is I think De Bruyne might be worth a punt, because playing in that 10, if he's fit, probably gets a run of games back to back to back, especially with how City are playing at the moment. There's upside there in the next few weeks. So if you can afford it, I really don't mind it. And look, Liverpool put West Ham to the sword, and if they take a similar approach, albeit they'll have some of their suspensions back, you never know. City could do the same. They still got that quality, especially with De Bruyne, able to generating types of returns that others can't. So something to consider if you fancied a little bit of upside. Ahmad and Bruno, I would say, for me personally, to keep in both cases. You obviously had some sense of conviction and you had an idea initially when buying them. Not too much has changed, right? Okay, United have had a few bad performances, but you kind of knew they had that in the locker anyway when purchasing them. Yeah, Anfield is a tough place to go. Maybe the worst fixture to have at the moment. Maybe even worse than the Emirates from an attacking standpoint. But after that, it's Southampton at home, Brighton at home. That's pretty decent, I would say, especially from an attacking standpoint. And as such, given what we've spoken about in terms of the efficiency of transfers, I'm not sure you need to make the move here. Now, I'd say the move for Bruno out is more justifiable, considering the likes of Brian Mbeumo and Anthony Gordon. But Ahmad, realistically, especially when Rodgers is suspended this week, where are you going to go at that price tag? Okay, if you can upgrade to Ismaila Sarr, fair enough. But, Chelsea at home, whilst not a bad fixture at all, still isn't the best fixture. And you have to ask yourself, again, is it worth that transfer? So look at your situation, but don't, I would say, read into the short term so much, and just because they've blanked for a few games, think this is going to go on forever. These guys will return at some point. And whilst maybe they don't have so much upside associated to it, for your team in the long run, it may be better to have a little more faith in the next few weeks and realize why you bought them in the first place. Many of you will be in a similar boat to myself when it comes to dealing with the suspension of Morgan Rodgers, someone who's been an absolute hero for many of our FPL teams and has honestly been such a great asset, especially when you consider the price. Now, I am going to try to cover as many scenarios as possible so that it fits into your team, because everyone's in slightly different situations, albeit there are a lot of similarities which overlap across them. For me, my preference is to play João Pedro. Now, your 8th attacker might not be João Pedro. It might be Ahmad. And in that case, I would just play Ahmad. But my preference is to play João Pedro. One, I would certainly say I have a philosophy on how the game should be played, what's optimal to do. And, similar to how real managers talk about their real football teams, I have a philosophy as to how I think it is the optimal way to play FPL. And for me, in general, that always involves playing attackers over defenders. In most cases, obviously, some are different. If I have a Marcos Alonso, for example, in the form of his life under Antonio Conte, I'll probably play him over an attacker who's away at Arsenal and hasn't scored in 38 games. But in this case, where João Pedro is such a good player, where Arsenal, I think, without Saka, will, just in general, I think they'll have some negative implications on the defense, which we can discuss why at a later date. And the fact that going to Brighton is not easy. João Pedro, we discussed this a bit earlier in the season. We called him the Giant Slayer for a reason. He's good against these bigger teams. So are Brighton. And then from a strategic standpoint, one, he serves as a partial differential because I guess he'll be around 45-ish%. But 55% of the field not having him is great for you if he gains. And secondly, especially if you don't have double Arsenal defense, it's a loss for all of those who do. So that's why I call it a double-edged sword. Now, what if you have double Arsenal defense? Well, I would really consider benching one of them because, like I said, I think Brighton have a pretty decent chance of scoring at the Amex. And again, this is a way to maximize your upside as well. If you have Amad Diallo as your 8th attacker, then yeah, sure, just play double Arsenal defense and play Amad Diallo. I don't think necessarily you must make a transfer so that you can have, you take Rodgers out and you get another midfielder. I don't think that's necessarily worth it. And then the alternative solution to playing someone like João Pedro is playing 4-4-2, which I've actually seen a lot of teams do. as expressed, my preference is to play João Pedro. In a lot of cases that I've seen so far, the fourth defender would be Lewis Hall. Now, one, he's away at Spurs, which is never going to be a particularly good game for keeper going clean sheet. And two, Fabian Schär is not injured, he's suspended. That's a big deal when it comes to them keeping clean sheets. Honestly, we were so lucky to get that 12-pointer at Old Trafford. Yeah, sure, Newcastle battered them for 30 minutes, but after that, United certainly had some chances, and some big chances at that. And it was one of the lucky clean sheets that we would have got this season if you are owner of Lewis Hall, right? So if you have serious conviction that he's going to keep a clean sheet and that he's going to get an attacking return as well, because I think you probably need the conviction in that as well to offset the likelihood of him conceding, then yeah, okay, sure, go there. If you're very comfortable playing double Arsenal defense plus Trent plus Robinson, and you don't want to expose yourself to that João Pedro type of upside, which is a double-edged sword again, then absolutely fine. But I would say if you are going to play 4-4-2, considering my philosophy, and I guess it's my channel, so like I'm going to speak from that point of view, I would say you need a lot of conviction, for me personally, in order to justify it. Similar to the Marcos Alonso example I gave earlier, albeit not as extreme. Finally, I told you we would work from top to bottom, so here we are with the defense. I'm going to speak about Liverpool defenders mainly and the optimal defensive structure because they very much tie in with each other and our plans going forward. For me, 4 of those slots are set in stone. 1, the premium. For me, that has to be Gabriel. I still think he's the best defender in the game. Obviously, if you want to go without him, I've seen someone who's gone without him for pretty much the whole season and had a huge amount of success, right? So it's not like it's impossible, but I would still say that he's the best defender in the game. Secondly, with the quality of the 4.5s to 5s, given the price changes and price increases, I would say 2 of those, Munoz, Robinson, and Hall in particular. 1, 4.0, because really you don't need that 5th defender at the moment. And 2, there's a lot of 4.0s that start each and every week anyway, so you may as well get one. And who knows, maybe you'll get some bench jam one week. And then, finally, either you take a premium in the form of Timber, Saliba, Trent, Van Dijk, Guardiola. I would say they're all bases are covered there. Obviously, you could have Raya as a second premium within the defensive unit as well. Or you take the other one of Hall, Munoz, Robinson, maybe a Castagna, maybe an Anderson, maybe an Olarena, maybe a Milenkovic, maybe a Murillo. You get the gist, right? So which one do you go for? One, it was probably dependent on your perspective in isolation of the asset, right? Do you think Guardiola is just going to continue an unbelievable run of scoring like he did maybe earlier in the season? Do you think it's more sensible to bring in Liverpool assets now, prepare for double game week 24? You're not too worried about Brentford away, Forest away. You're not too worried about the Gomez and Canate injuries and bringing them in. Do you want to just go double Arsenal defense because they've been, I guess, named as the best defense in the league? Or do you want to just take some funds out, spread them elsewhere? You have an attacking asset that you would really like. I don't know, maybe Watkins this week. You don't really care about the risk. You just want to go there anyway. And you have so much conviction in the Hall, Robinson, Munoz rotation that you just go there, or like a Milenkovic, right? So all of those things are perspective dependent. I thought I would just lay out the framework and then you can basically select from there. We should touch a little bit more on Liverpool's defense. I think they've got a good chance of keeping a clean sheet against Man United at home. And to be honest, even at Forest, I wouldn't say it's great, but it's not too bad given what you expect Forest's approach to be. I think it's hard to keep a clean sheet at the G-Tech, as we've seen this season, and then the double follows quickly after. So at least if you get them in now, you're saving yourself transfers down the line. There's obviously upside associated to assets like Trent and Van Dijk, not just because of the attacking returns, but also the likelihood of clean sheets relative to other players. So I like it. And I'm more bullish on buying one of them now than I was earlier on. Maybe even as of last week. I thought West Ham would score. They hit the woodwork 3 times, Swings and roundabouts, but whatever. That fixture's gone. I think Man United at home's good. You ride the wave a little bit in the next 2, hope to get a bit lucky, and then you move on from there. And if you do get a little bit lucky, you'll be in such a brilliant position. You would have caught price rises, points, and you'll be ahead of the curve in terms of transfers. So I like it a lot more than I used to do, and I basically just wanted to express that. Albeit it is not necessary, because you could simply just have another view that they don't keep too many clean sheets in the short term, and you'll attack now other spots and then utilize transfers down the line to pick them up down the line. That is all she wrote for this video, ladies and gentlemen. It flowed quite well, this video. Very few cuts. If you did enjoy it, make sure to drop a like on the video. 300 likes would be absolutely magnificent, as would be hitting 6,000 subscribers. So for the regular viewers who haven't and the new viewers, consider doing so. I shall be back tomorrow for the team selection. In the meantime, have a wonderful day and goodbye.